Okay, let's unpack this. We are tackling, well, one of life's most fundamental problems, at least in the plant kingdom.
Which is?
How do you reproduce when you literally cannot move? I mean, it's a real challenge.
He really is.
So today we're diving into the dramatic and sometimes surprisingly elaborate world of plant matchmaking.
Right, specifically looking at pollination, how plants manage to get their non-motile gametes together for fertilization.
Exactly. We've got a stack of sources here on all the elegant and, frankly, sometimes bizarre solutions they've evolved.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how much energy goes into just moving these male gametes locked up inside pollen grains.
Because they just can't walk over themselves.
Precisely. So pollination, at its core, is just that crucial transfer step, getting pollen grains to the stigma, the female part, that's ready to receive them.
And our sources seem to break this down into, what, 3 main types based on where the pollen comes from?
That's right. You've got autogamy, that's self-pollination within the same flower. Then Geitonogamy, which is between flowers on the same plant. And finally, Xenogamy, true cross-pollination between different plants.
Okay, let's start with the isolationists. Autogamy.
Yeah.
Self-pollination.
Mm-hmm. Pollen moves from the anther to the stigma of the very same flower.
Sounds efficient, like a guaranteed return on investment almost.
It's the ultimate efficiency play, you could say. But for it to work reliably, the flower usually needs a couple of things.
Okay.
It generally needs to be bisexual, having both male and female parts, like you see in Contrivances. And crucially, they need homogamy.
Homogamy, meaning?
Meaning the male and female parts mature at the exact same time. Think of Mirabilis. Everything's ready simultaneously.
And the sources highlight this really incredible adaptation.
Yeah.
Almost like the ultimate self-insurance, Cleistogamy.
Ah, yes. Cleistogamy is fascinating. These are bisexual flowers that just stay closed. They never open up.
Never. So how does pollination happen?
Well, because the anthers and stigma are right there, close together inside that sealed chamber, the pollen just naturally falls onto the stigma. Job done.
Wow. So it guarantees seeds even if, say, the weather's awful or there are no bees around.
Exactly. It's like an evolutionary hedge fund. You see it in common plants like groundnut arachis, hypogea, and viola, oxalis too.
And there's something similar, bud pollination, like in wheat and rice.
Yep, similar idea. Self-pollination happens right at the bud stage before the flower even properly opens. It's common in a lot of our major crops.
But okay, this efficiency, it feels like it must come at a cost, right?
Yeah.
You're guaranteeing quantity, maybe?
Yeah.
But you get zero genetic variation.
Precisely. That's the trade-off. It's a great short-term survival trick, but not ideal for long-term adaptation.
Which maybe brings us to Geitonogamy. You said that's pollination between different flowers, but still in the same plant.
Exactly. Like in maize, for example. You have separate male tassels and female ears on the same plant.
But wait, if they're on the same plant, why does it need, like, wind or an insect to move the pollen? And why is it different from just straightforward self-pollination?
That's the key distinction. Genetically speaking, you're right. It is self-pollination. The offspring get all their genes from that single parent plant.
Okay.
But functionally, or you could say ecologically, it acts more like cross-pollination because you do need that external agent, the wind, maybe a bee, to physically move the pollen from flower A to flower B on that same plant structure.
I see. So genetically self, but functionally cross. That makes sense. But then if plants can self-pollinate so easily, either through autogamy or even Geitonogamy, why do so many species seem to go to such complex and risky lengths to actually avoid it? What's the downside?
The big downside is genetic decay over time. Continuous self-pollination, generation after generation, leads straight to something called inbreeding depression.
Inbreeding depression,
Sure.
meaning the offspring get weaker.
Yeah, basically a loss of genetic health, vigor, fitness. The plants become less adaptable, more susceptible to disease. So, for long-term survival, the evolutionary goal for most species is xenogamy, true cross-pollination with genetically different individuals.
And to make that happen, they've developed all sorts of tricks, these outbreeding devices.
Dozens of them. Really elaborate strategies.
Okay, so what's the first line of defense against self-pollination? The simplest tactic seems to be just timing.
Absolutely. That's dichogamy. Simply making sure the anthers, the male parts, and the stigmas, the female parts, mature at different times.
Staggering them.
Exactly. If the anthers mature first, releasing pollen before the stigma on the same flower is receptive, that's called protandry.
Protandry. Examples.
Think of sunflower or cotton. The pollen is long gone before the stigma is ready. It's like the guys leave the party before the girls are ready to dance.
Okay, I get that image. And the other way around. If the female part, the gynoecium, matures first.
That's protogeny. You see that in plants like ficus figs and magnolia. The stigma is receptive first, gets pollinated hopefully from another flower, and then the anthers mature. It ensures its own pollen can't be used.
Clever. So
Yeah.
beyond timing, another fairly simple strategy is just separating the parts entirely. Unisexuality or declining.
Yep, another powerful barrier. If you have separate male and female flowers, but they're still on the same plant that's a monoecious setup, like in maize or castor,
Okay.
that successfully prevents autogamy, self-pollination, within a single flower. But it doesn't stop Geitonogamy, pollen moving between flowers on that same plant.
Right. But some plants take it further.
They do, the dioecious arrangement.
Yeah.
Here you have entirely separate male plants and female plants, like in papaya. That prevents both autogamy and Geitonogamy. It absolutely forces cross-pollination, the ultimate insurance for diversity.
Okay, so timing, separation, then plants start developing actual physical obstacles like handicaps to make self-pollination difficult.
Exactly. We see physical barriers called hercogamy, natural structures within the flower that physically block the path between the anther and stigma.
How does that work?
Well, they might be positioned really far apart, or maybe one is hidden behind a flap or inside a structure. Calotropis has a really unique setup like this.
Interesting. And there's also that trick, prepotency, where the plant kind of gives pollen from another flower an advantage.
Yeah, that's a neat one. In plants like apple and grape, if both self-pollen and cross-pollen land on the stigma at the same time, the pollen from the different flower germinates much faster, grows down the style more quickly.
So it wins the race.
It wins the race. It's like an internal rule favoring outside genetic material, prioritizing diversity.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but here's where it gets really interesting, right? Moving beyond just physical separation or timing to the molecular level. The plant somehow recognizes its own pollen and says, nope, not you.
Yes, self-incompatibility, often called self-sterility. This is an incredibly sophisticated, genetically controlled gatekeeping system.
Wow. How does it even work?
Well, it operates on a couple of levels. There's a morphological type based on structure and a physiological type based on, like, biochemistry.
Okay, structure first.
Right.
Morphological,
Yeah,
like heterostyly.
exactly. Like in primula, the primrose, you see different flower forms within the same species where the length of the style, the female part, and the stamens, the male parts, vary.
Different lengths.
Yeah, dimorphic 2 forms or sometimes trimorphic 3 forms. Think of it like a lock and key. Pollen from a flower with short stamens and a long style can really only effectively pollinate a flower with long stamens and a short style, and vice versa.
So the physical shape forces cross-pollination between the different forms.
Precisely. It's a structural solution.
But the really deep defense is the physiological one. How does the plant chemically tell its own pollen from foreign pollen? That seems incredible.
It is. This is controlled by a specific gene called the S gene, which has many, many different versions or alleles. Think of it like a complex genetic ID badge system.
An ID badge.
Okay. And this is where we get the distinction between sporophytic and gamophytic self-incompatibility, SSI and GSI.
Okay, let's break that down slowly. Sporophytic first. SSI.
In sporophytic incompatibility, SSI, the rejection, whether the pollen is accepted or not, depends on the genetic makeup, the S alleles of the parent plant that produce the pollen, specifically the tissue around the pollen, the sporophyte. And crucially, it's recognized by the stigma surface.
So the stigma itself acts like a bouncer, checking the ID of the pollen based on its parent's genetics.
Kind of, yeah. If the pollen's parental ID matches the stigma's ID, rejection happens right there on the surface. The pollen tube might not even start growing. You see this in the Brassicaceae family. Think broccoli, cabbage.
Okay, so the stigma controls it. What about the other type, GSI? Gamophytic.
In gamophytic incompatibility, GSI, it's different. The incompatibility reaction depends on the specific S allele carried within the pollen grain itself, its own gamete genotype.
Ah, so it's the pollen's own ID, not its parent's.
Exactly. Each pollen grain carries one S allele from the parent. If that specific S allele in the pollen matches either of the S alleles present in the female pistil tissue, the style, then that specific pollen grain is rejected.
And where does the rejection happen?
Usually not on the surface. The pollen tube might start growing down the style, but then the style tissue recognizes the matching allele and stops its growth, causing the tube to fail before it reaches the ovule. It's a rejection within the female tissue, found in families like the Solanaceae, tomatoes, potatoes.
It's just amazing, the layers of complexity, plants evolving these intricate systems just to stop fertilization from happening. but obviously for the greater genetic good.
It's absolutely the evolutionary long game. Promoting diversity is key.
Right. So now that we know how plants kind of enforce these rules, avoiding self-pollination, promoting cross-pollination, let's look at the actual delivery agents. How does the pollen get there? Starting with the non-living ones, the abiotic agents.
Wind and water.
And our sources really emphasize that this is, well, non-directional, totally random, and honestly, pretty wasteful.
It's a massive numbers game, absolutely. Because delivery relies purely on chance. The most common abiotic method is anemophily wind pollination.
Wind? Okay. So what do these flowers look like?
Well, they've usually sacrificed aesthetics for function. They tend to be small, inconspicuous, often greenish or brownish. No bright colors, no scent, no nectar. They don't need to attract anything.
Wasting no energy on advertising.
Exactly. But they compensate structurally. They often have long, dangly stamens that release pollen easily into the wind.
And big feathery stigmas.
Yes, large feathery stigmas to maximize the chance of catching any pollen floating by. And the pollen itself has to be dry, light, non-sticky, produced in enormous quantities.
Because most of it just blows away.
Vast amounts are wasted. But it's a successful strategy for many plants, especially grasses, like maize, and also conifers like pine trees.
Okay, wind makes sense. Then there's hydrophily water pollination.
Yeah.
You said this is much rarer.
Exceedingly rare, yeah. Only found in about 30 genera of aquatic plants, mostly monocots.
And it's confusing because a lot of plants that live in water, like water hyacinth or water lily, actually stick their flowers up above the surface and use insects or wind, right?
That's true. True water pollination, where the pollen travels in or on the water, requires some really cool specializations.
Like what?
Well, take epihydrophyly pollination on the water surface. The classic example is Vallisneria. It's dioecious, separate male and female plants.
Okay.
The female flower reaches the surface on this long, coiled stalk, like a spring. The male flowers detach from the male plant underwater and float up to the surface. They drift around.
Like little pollen boats?
Sort of. They drift until they bump into a female flower. Pollination happens right there on the surface. And then this is the neat part. The female flower stalk coils back up, pulling the pollinated flower back underwater to develop the fruit safely.
That recoiling mechanism is fantastic. Just pulls it right down.
It's brilliant. Then you have hypohydrophyly, where pollination happens entirely submerged, like in the seagrass Zostera.
How does that work underwater?
The pollen grains are amazing. They're long, like ribbons, needle-shaped, and they don't have the usual outer layer, the exene. They have the same density as water, so they just drift passively with the currents until they contact a submerged female flower stigma.
And the pollen doesn't get waterlogged.
Ah, good point. For almost all hydrophilous pollen, whether surface or submerged, it's protected by a mucilaginous covering, like a waterproof slime layer to prevent it from getting wet and damaged.
Okay, so whether it's wind or water, the abiotic theme is no frills, no color, no nectar, rely on chance, and compensate by producing absolutely enormous amounts of pollen.
That's the essence of it. They're sacrificing targeted efficiency for, reliable zero-cost delivery by the elements.
Which contrasts sharply with the other main category of agents, the biotic ones, living things, mostly insects, right? Entomophily.
Oh, yeah. Insect pollination accounts for something like 80% of all pollination globally. It's huge. And honeybees are often the star players.
And here, the plants are definitely running a full-scale advertising campaign.
Absolutely. Flowers pollinated by insects are often large, brightly colored, fragrant. They produce nectar as a reward.
Advertising pays.
It does. And the pollen itself is often different, too. It might be sticky or have spines, often coated in this oily substance called pollen kit, so it adheres really well to the insect's body. Flowers might also be clustered together into inflorescences to make a bigger visual target.
The rewards aren't always nectar, are they?
No, sometimes it's just edible pollen itself, like in roses. Sometimes the attraction is visual, but not the flower itself. Think of the bright red bracts, those modified leaves around the tiny flowers of bougainvillea. They act like billboards.
And sometimes the reward is even weirder, like providing a safe place to lay eggs.
Right. Like in the giant Amorphophilus flower, which can be 6 feet tall. It offers a safe oviposition site, a nursery, for certain insects in exchange for pollination services.
Which leads us into some of the really spectacular, highly specialized partnerships, like the yucca plant and its moss. That one's almost unbelievable.
The yucca and the pronuba moth, it's a classic example of obligate mutualism. Neither can survive without the other.
How does it work again?
The female moth collects pollen from one yucca flower, forms it into a ball, then she flies to another flower, pierces the ovary wall with her ovipositor, and lays her eggs inside among the ovules. Then she deliberately climbs up to the stigma and actively pushes the pollen ball into it, ensuring pollination.
Wow. She makes sure the plant gets pollinated after laying her eggs.
Yes, because her larva will then feed on some of the developing seeds inside the ovary, so she ensures her offspring have food by ensuring the plant reproduces. It's an incredible co-evolved system.
But talk about evolutionary risk relying entirely on one single partner species. Definitely high stakes. And then there are plants that rely on, like, mechanical ingenuity. The letter mechanism in salvia or sage.
Oh, the salvia mechanism is beautiful mechanical precision. The flower has two stamens, but one part is sterile and forms a landing platform.
Okay.
When a bee lands on that lower sterile lobe to get nectar, it pushes down like a lever. This causes the fertile upper part of the stamen to pivot downwards, like a hammer, and it dusts the bee's back with pollen in exactly the right spot.
So the flower actively puts the pollen on the bee.
Exactly. And then when the bee visits another salvia flower, particularly one in the slightly older female receptive protogynous stage, its pollen-dusted back brushes against the waiting stigma. Perfect transfer.
That's just clever engineering. And what about the orchids that use deceit? The pseudocopulation thing.
Yeah, some orchids are masters of deception. High-stakes trickery, really. The flower of one genus, Ophrys, mimics the female of a specific species of bee or wasp, not just in shape and color, but it even produces chemicals that mimic the female insect's pheromones.
No way, to attract the males.
Exactly. The male wasp is fooled, thinks the flower is a female, and tries to mate with it pseudocopulation. In the process of trying to copulate with the flower, it picks up the orchid's pollen packets, pollinia, or deposits ones it's already carrying.
The poor, confused wasp.
He gets nothing out of it, but the orchid gets pollinated. It's incredibly specific. Often one orchid species relies on just one specific insect species.
But we also have the cheaters, right? The nectar robbers or pollen robbers.
Oh, absolutely. Evolution always has loopholes. You get insects like maybe certain bumblebees. The Bombus affinis queen on Aquilegia is an example.
Oh, yeah.
They bypass the whole system. They want the nectar reward, but they don't want to go through the proper entrance of the flower where the pollen is, so they just use their mouth parts to pierce a hole in the base of the flower tube near the nectar source.
And steal the nectar directly.
Yep. They steal the reward without ever contacting the anthers or stigma, so they get fed, but the plant gets nothing, no pollination service. They're robbers.
Every system has its cheats. It's an evolutionary arms race.
Constantly.
Okay, so we've covered insects heavily, but moving beyond them, let's just quickly review the sheer diversity of other animal pollinators out there. It's not just bees and moths.
Not at all. Globally, the range is amazing. You have ornithophily, bird pollination.
Birds, like hummingbirds.
Hummingbirds in the Americas, sunbirds in Africa and Asia. They're attracted to brightly colored flowers, often red or orange, which are usually odorless because birds don't rely much on smell. But these flowers have to produce copious amounts of quite watery nectar to fuel the bird's high metabolism. Think bombax, the red silk cotton tree.
Okay, and bats. Chiropterophily.
Yep, common in the tropics. Bats pollinate large, sturdy, often white or pale-colored flowers that open at night and produce a strong, musky or fruity odor, and lots of nectar and pollen. The baobab tree at Ansonia is a classic example pollinated by fruit bats.
The flowers have to be sturdy to handle a bat landing on them, I guess.
Definitely, but it gets even stranger than birds and bats.
Go on.
Well, there's malacophyly. That's pollination by snails and slugs.
Snails.
Yep, documented in some plants like certain species of arum and some lilies, often ground-level flowers. And even Ophiophyly snake pollination has been suggested for plants like santalum, sandalwood, and michelia.
Snakes, wow. Okay, what about slightly larger animals? I remember reading about lemurs.
Yes, the traveler's palm, Ravenella, in Madagascar is pollinated by lemurs. Again, the flowers have to be incredibly robust to withstand a primate climbing on them and forcing them open to get the nectar.
Incredible.
And we even have lizards pollinating some plants, like certain species of flax in New Zealand. And don't forget, Myrmecophyly ant pollination. Ants aren't always great pollinators because they can secrete substances that harm pollen, but they are documented pollinators for some species, like mango and certain acacias.
It seems like almost any animal that moves can potentially be recruited by a plant for pollination under the right circumstances.
Pretty much. It shows the incredible adaptability and evolutionary pressure involved in getting those gametes together.
So let's try and wrap this up. What does this all mean? We've gone on this journey from, like, the super safe closed-door policy of cleistogamy
The ultimate self-insurance.
through the timing games of dichogamy and the physical barriers of hercogamy,
Avoiding selfing.
then into the really complex genetic gatekeeping of the S genes, self-incompatibility,
The molecular recognize and reject system.
all the way to these incredibly intricate, specialized, sometimes high-risk partnerships like the yucca moth, the salvia lever, the deceptive orchids.
Yeah, the whole spectrum from simple physics to complex biochemistry and co-evolved behavior.
What's the big picture takeaway here?
I think the synthesis is that you see this constant tension. You have these highly evolved, incredibly efficient, targeted strategies using animals, often with amazing specificity. But alongside that, the generalized, seemingly wasteful abiotic strategies, wind and water, persist and are hugely important.
Because they're reliable, even if inefficient.
Exactly. They require those enormous amounts of pollen, as the sources say, because it's a numbers game, a gamble. But it works. It highlights this relentless evolutionary pressure around reproduction. How do you balance the guarantee of selfing, which leads to stagnation, against the risks and rewards of crossing? How do you balance hyperspecialization against generalized strategies?
It's truly astonishing, the variety of solutions. Which leaves us with maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Considering that intense coevolution we saw, like with the yucca moth, where the plant absolutely depends on that one moth species,
Yeah.
what happens to that plant if its single specialized pollinator goes extinct?
A critical question in conservation today.
Yeah. This whole deep dive really shows how the entire plant kingdom walks this tightrope, constantly balancing the amazing efficiency you get from specialization against the maybe fundamental safety you get from more generalized, even wasteful strategies. It's something to think about the next time you see a flower. Any flower. What intricate dependencies, what evolutionary story might be hidden inside?